Thank you for watching us on YouTube. But did you know that if you're on the go, you can get the full show as a podcast now? You can get our morning breakdown of the most important topics facing our country, news not being covered by the mainstream media, interviews with change-making progressives, and info on what you can actually do about all this. Search for The Damage Report on your favorite podcast app and subscribe so you know when new episodes are ready to go. In America right now, we are obviously very focused on what's going on with Brett Kavanaugh, the continuing accusations. Will he get on the Supreme Court? Meanwhile, this is a serious one. Meanwhile, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are dealing with an absolutely brutal new outbreak of Ebola that they're dealing with. So far, the death toll lower than it was in years past, but the situation has become much more complicated in terms of their ability to actually do something about it. And by the way, since the outbreak in the DRC was declared on August 1st, there have been 150 confirmed and probable cases and more than 100 deaths. The case toll has been slowing down, but there are a series of grave obstacles to actually doing something about it because in comparison to the earlier, like 2014, 2015 cases of Ebola, we have cases that are spread out over a very large distance, more than 100 miles. Some of those now in areas where war is going on, and health officials in some cases are still trying to go in there and deal with it, but obviously it makes it much more difficult to move equipment, to freely move about the countryside, and that means that although they learned a lot from past cases of Ebola, it is much harder to actually do something about it in this case.
Crazy. I remember when the Ebola outbreak was before. Was 2014? You said?
There's been several, but that was the worst.
Latest one where everyone, it was actually the talk of international talk, and actually we talked about it in America. Crazy. It didn't happen here. Straight up. And a lot of people learned a lot of things about it because we cared. Imagine that world when we're caring about other things going on in the world because here it's just normal issues we're dealing with. But instead we're dealing with how many crazy things are going on within our own country. So this happens and we're thinking, oh yeah, Ebola, that whole thing that we don't care about anymore because we're dealing with a rogue president. It sucks that you long for those days, but you long for those days.
Yeah, and right now it's relatively constrained to that area geographically. But remember, during the last one, we were worried about this spreading out. Obviously, it's terrible the damage it's doing there, but this is the sort of thing that could become international, could get all over the place. We narrowly avoided that back in the past outbreak. And so I was looking into it, and so this is a little, just a test, a sort of gut test. Back in 2014, 2015, how many people died from Ebola in that outbreak? Just out of curiosity, your estimate, how many people died?
The 2014 outbreak?
That was the serious one, like people were talking about it. More serious than this in terms of number dead. Here we have 100.
1,100.
11,000. Isn't that crazy? I mean, I only know that because I looked it up, but that is crazy how bad it was. That's 3 9/11s, and we've largely moved on, so much so that when it comes back, we don't even really focus on it.
I said 11, right? I meant 11.
You said 1100.
I meant 11,000.
11,000, well then you got it then.
You guys cut my mic.
Exactly, so that's going on in the DRC. Meanwhile, that was a very happy intro. Again, not a happy situation though. In the western portion of China, Uyghur Muslims are being detained by the hundreds of thousands in an attempt to indoctrinate them, incorporate them more into Chinese culture, and especially stamp out the Muslim religion there. These ethnic Uyghur Muslims spend their days in high-pressure indoctrination programs where they're forced to listen to lectures, sing hymns praising the Chinese Communist Party, and write, quote, self-criticism essays, according to detainees who have been released. And we have some more details about the goal here. The officials have not banned Islam, but dictated very narrow limits for how it should be practiced, including a prohibition against praying at home if there were friends or guests present. In other sessions, the inmates were forced to memorize laws and write essays criticizing themselves, but also in some cases, the government is installing video cameras in the homes of these people to make sure that they're acting right once they're outside of these indoctrination programs.
Again, hey, these are humans. Imagine this is your life, and this is what you have to go through. Again, critical essays about yourselves because of who you are and who you grew up with and how you were taught to praise and worship. That's what's going on in other parts of the world. But we're hearing about China. We're hearing about it with tariff situations and how much they're screwing us over. The collision of what's important in the world sometimes needs to be refocused.
Yeah. I mean, very good point. To the limited extent that we hear anything about China now, It's the tariffs. Trump today said that he believes that China is interfering in the 2018 elections. So hey, he's interested in that topic slightly. But no, this is a sort of internal thing that maybe a documentary will be made and maybe it'll do well at Sundance and people will pay attention to it for a little bit. But for the people, hundreds of thousands of people with this culture, they are being forced to effectively destroy their culture on their own, being forced to do it themselves. And that is, of course, absolutely horrendous. And while all of that is going on, meanwhile in that footage of Yemen, of course, making it look like the situation there is relatively stable. We know, of course, that it is not. Many times we've talked about the civil war there, our own involvement, the US in that war, and Saudi Arabia's absolutely horrendous bombing campaigns, the cholera outbreaks and starvation going on there, the bombing of the school bus that we talked about, where dozens of school kids were unnecessarily killed. One area of Yemen is trying something fairly radical, especially for Yemen, and that is gun control. So Yemen apparently has more privately owned guns per person than any, except America, of course, where prosperous gun owners can afford far more, but it is very common for people to own guns. And what they're attempting to do is a total ban on guns for non-uniformed personnel. This is Mukalla, the capital of Hadramaut province on the southern coast. The only people carrying guns are in uniform. There are banners warning civilians not to bear arms in public. Those wishing to enter them must turn over the weapons at one of several checkpoints. And they say that they have bins where the guns are being collected that they say could arm multiple militias. Now, apparently, culturally, there are big portions of Yemen where various tribes say that being armed is a thing of self-sufficiency and pride and all of that, very much like portions of America, of course, but not so in this area, which means they're a little bit more amenable to this sort of gun control proposal.
You know, we've talked about gun control in America before, and there's examples of other countries and how there's certain gun control measures that they do have that have worked, and when we compare them to ourselves, a lot of times we go, blah. So again, this seems like it's an even tougher hill to climb in a country like Yemen where seemingly there's constant war. Which probably not seemingly. But so if there's any kind of success in a country here where this happens to this degree, you definitely can't bring this up to many Americans. Be like, well, it worked in Yemen, because they'll go, Yemen? That war-torn country that we have nothing to do with?
Yeah,
it won't work. So I mean, if it works, it won't work to convince anyone here.
Yeah, well, certainly more power to them for trying. I mean, the more difficult a domestic situation you have, the more admirable attempts at social reform actually are. We've talked previously about in Saudi Arabia, the women who are pushing for the right to drive and all of that. Some people have died in that activism, but they have been making strides in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia because of the audacious action of activists like that. Same sort of thing going on here in Yemen in a situation that is even more deadly, at least on a daily basis. Thank you very much for watching this clip from the Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.